Hi, everybody. This is Micah Lieberman once again coming to you from Scope Summit and Scope 365. And I talk to people who are doing interesting things in clinical research, clinical innovation. And it's really fun for me to do these kind of informal interviews, these kind of, we call them voices of scope now officially. So this is Jim Kremidas. So many of you know Jim from Scope or from a lot of other roles he's had in pharma, in the CRO world, way back from Lilly days, also heading up an association, but he has a new role now. So Jim is now the executive director of AMRC, Association for Multi-Site Research Corporations. Jim, how's it going, man?
Going great. It's going great. I mean, we just kicked off AMRC, as you know, uh, online in January, but face to face at a conference at Scope this year. So yeah, things are going really
Good,
well.
good for you, man. Congratulations on doing that. There's absolutely a need. All right, so we were going to talk about it. Last time we talked, I said, hey, let's catch up on some stuff because you've run panels for me at Scope on different topics. When you were
Right.
with pharma, then you were outside and you were with a nonprofit. And most of the stuff we have done historically has been bigger picture stuff. Like you have a lot of experience in the weeds, but also you've been doing this a long time. So I think the discussion today that we're going to talk about is broader. So
Okay.
the prompt is, kind of talking about beyond just, AMRC. There's some of what we're going to talk about is what drove you to do this, but also thinking about putting your hat on from all these years of being in trials, designing them, running them. We're heading to Scope in February. So I'm going to ask the question of what do you think the future of clinical research is? Um, let's talk future state, current
Okay.
state and future state, right? And it's hard sometimes to like do this without being too pie in the sky or
Yeah.
being negative, too negative, right? It's okay. So
Yeah.
let's I'm going to let you wax poetic a little bit because this is related to a conversation we had before.
Okay. Sounds good. Well, as far as the future of clinical research, you hear people talk about what makes things effective when it involves human beings, right? So clinical research is all about the team that you have working on the project. And I like to describe it as an ecosystem because when you think of all the different players in clinical trials, everything from data management to site personnel to statisticians, on and on it goes, patients, CROs, um, it's really a team effort. So then the question becomes, all right, why are we so focused on technology? We hear a lot about AI and these other things, and not that they aren't important, because I do think they're going to help a lot.
Hmm.
But I really think it's important that we realize that as scientists, we tend to focus on technology sometimes more than we do on the human part of conducting trials,
Hmm.
right? So I think the thing that is most interesting that has sort of been we've sort of been talking about it. I mean, at ACRP, we talked a lot about training staff and building
Yeah.
the workforce, et cetera, and they continue to do that. But what's interesting is if you look at what drives quality, it's generally speaking the lack of variance. Okay.
Yes.
So the more variance you have, the more likely you are to have bad quality. Well, quality is along with speed and cost are the key elements of clinical research in terms of getting it done, right? We can measure speed, we can measure costs. Quality is one of the big questions. And my personal opinion is that if we have more standardized training and development of staff, if we have more standardized SOPs across organizations, if we have more standardized ways of doing things, in other words, so that there's less variance in how the study's being conducted, the more likely we are to have better quality, more speed, et cetera, and lower costs. So, you know, not to share my personal bias, but that's what drove me to be interested in participating as the executive director of AMRC, because each of these organizations are structured that way. They have the dedicated headcount in certain roles. Historically, a lot of clinical research was done by clinicians who were doing it part-time, or they did it on
Hmm.
the side. They didn't do it dedicated. These
Hmm.
organizations are dedicated and they have the PIs. The PIs don't have to worry about running a business. The
Right.
study coordinators don't have to worry about other issues that site staff or clinical, I should say, clinical staff have to worry about. Their
Right,
focus.
because sometimes they're wearing two hats. They'll be running the business inside of the business, right?
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So this is, I think this idea of having dedicated personnel in specific roles with specific training and SOPs, et cetera, is going to drive better quality, faster turnaround times, and it's going to be better for patients in the long run.
Yeah. Okay, so two things. So I'm going to go back. I agree with you. One thing you said is we're going outside of sites, just pharma in general, CROs, all this stuff was we're talking about variance and how do we kind of increase our quality overall as an industry.
Mhm.
If I'm at a pharmaceutical company, I do that across my department and across my organization. There's always a reorg. We're always improving in
Right.
company X or Y or Z. At the same time, it seems that some of the biggest redundancies and the burdens that goes to the sites from pharma, for example, is coming from the fact that each pharma company is acting autonomously, of
Mhm.
course.
Mhm.
They're privately held companies, sometimes publicly held companies, whatever they are, they're their own, they have their own set of molecules that they're trying to put through development, run their trials, and sometimes competing for patients. What happens then, of course, is whether you're a PI or site, is you're receiving the same old information over and over and over again. And it's not high tech important stuff. It's really so you had mentioned going across an organization, reducing that. So if you look at Transcelerate, a lot of the things you've been involved in,
Mhm.
is that also tying into this about how do we, as an industry across companies, figure out what work we are doing really isn't competitive. It's not a crown jewel that I own that's part of my intellectual property that makes it special. It's not that molecule. It's often paperwork, templates, Rob DeChico for years has talked, way back when at Scope, when we first started talking about the common protocol template, or, all
Yeah,
these things. Like some of this is not high tech, man.
I
Is
know. I know.
is that I mean, you have experience with this from the past and currently. So is that part of what you're also trying to do? Can AMRC as a gathering of many multi-site research corporations that have the ability to really accelerate research, are they also a voice, just like SCRS is a voice, Transcelerated is a voice, to reduce some of that repetitive work?
Yeah, well, so here's a vision to consider. Let's say you're a sponsor and you do want to reduce some of those redundancies. And I mean, something as simple as a feasibility assessment.
Good
Okay.
example. Yeah.
Let's say, I mean, I'm sure you've heard this. Sites get asked the same questions over and over by the same
Over and over.
companies.
Sure.
So what if you had a strategic partnership with a handful of MCRCs, our members,
Hmm.
and with each one of those, you had all the data you need coming out of their corporate office in terms of feasibility. And you let that corporate office tell you from the MCRC, these are the sites that have the patients you're looking for. These are the sites that have the capabilities that you need to conduct this trial. Here you go. Here's 6 sites out of our 20 that are perfect
Right.
for this study. We do it the other way around right now. In other words, the feasibility should be done by the central office of the corporation that owns those sites and then provided to the sponsor instead of the sponsor not trusting them
Interesting.
and
Right.
going in and having to do
Right.
their own feasibility assessment on
Right.
each site. Put some stake into it in terms of what it means to the MCRC if they fail.
Hmm.
There are things that could be done to share some of the risk. I don't know specifically what they are. Those are the kinds of things that we need to evolve
Yeah, but it's
and
an
learn.
interesting point, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
So
like that.
you have a partnership now. You're like, okay, I need 30 sites. I got 5 different groups I'm working with, and each one of them can provide me 5 or 6 sites. And that's it. That's all my feasibility part. I get the contracts in place. I
Right.
sign 4 or 5 contracts. I mean, it would speed things up dramatically. Just that simple element right there.
Yeah.
The
Good
question
example.
becomes the question comes down to trust and communication. And if you don't trust the sites or you don't trust the MCRC, then you're not going to do that as a sponsor. If you're not communicating effectively back and forth, this goes both ways. It's not just the sponsors and it's not just the sites. That also creates problems. So this is why when I talk about strategic partnerships, I'm not talking about, going to conferences and rubbing elbows and going out to dinner and that kind of stuff. I'm talking about really spending time understanding one another and really just creating a win-win relationship.
Yep. And I think the elbow rubbing at scope, I want to give a pitch for that. That's where it could all start. Jim,
Hey, that's
we
good
all got to
too.
rub elbows at scope in February.
I'm
Then,
not diminishing networking. I am not
yeah, I'm
diminishing that. It's
joking.
very important.
Hey, one phrase that came up at Scope years ago when kind of the remote trials and the decentralization of trials is really starting to accelerate. We had a panel, and I think it was Ken Getz was my facilitator. You know Ken very well.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
the term that we were using that was coming up and over, because people get excited about technology, like you said,
Yeah.
and it was high tech and high touch. You need both.
You
You
need
got
both.
you got to have that touch. This is a human-based industry, right? This is all about it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, man.
It's a
All right.
it's a service industry. If you're a
Yep.
site, you're providing a service. If you're a
Yep.
CRO, you're providing a service. And it really comes down to the talent of the people who you have providing that service. And are they trained? And do they have processes in place? And are they consistent? And that's what drives quality
Yep.
and
Uh,
speed.
Yep. Absolutely. All right, man. We're out of time, but this is fun. We could keep going. This is great. And I do like the idea of everybody kind of working together. A lot of these problems, you hear complaints, you hear solutions. So the more you bring people together, I think it's not easy, but it's doable. It is doable. Every year at Scope, things are getting a little bit better. There's always new people doing new stuff. So I'm optimistic. Ultimately, I'm optimistic. Yeah. Hey,
Me
Jim.
too. Me too.
Cool. Good to see you again. Thank you for
Good,
doing
good,
this.
good seeing you, Micah. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Bye, Jim.